The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the quiet suburban streets. 17-year-old Maya Johnson gripped the steering wheel of her family's old sedan, humming along to the soft melody playing on the radio. It was just another, ordinary day for her. She had finished her final class of the week and was now heading to pick up her younger brother from soccer practice. Her mind wandered as she drove, thinking about the upcoming moot court competition where she'd be defending a fictional case in front of real judges. She loved these moments when life felt simple, predictable even. Maya slowed down at a red light, tapping her fingers lightly on the dashboard. The car ahead of her moved forward and she followed suit. But before she could fully cross the intersection, a flash of blue and red lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Her heart skipped a beat. She pulled over to the side of the road, her hands instinctively gripping the wheel tighter. Glancing in the mirror, she saw a police cruiser parked behind her. An officer stepped out, his tall frame silhouetted against the late afternoon sunlight. Officer Greg Monroe approached her window with deliberate steps, his boots clicking against the pavement. He was known around town, not for his kindness or dedication to duty, but for his sharp tongue and dismissive attitude, especially toward people he deemed troublemakers. His reputation preceded him, though Maya didn't know this yet. All she knew was that she hadn't done anything wrong. Still, her stomach churned with unease as she rolled down the window. "License and registration," Officer Monroe barked, leaning into the open window. His tone was curt, almost accusatory, as if he'd already decided she was guilty of something. Maya nodded quickly, trying to stay calm. "Yes, sir," she replied politely, reaching into the glove compartment for the necessary documents. As she handed them over, she noticed the way his eyes scanned her face, lingering perhaps a little too long. There was something in his expression, a mix of skepticism and disdain, that made her feel small, insignificant. "You sure you're allowed to drive this thing?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "This car looks like it might fall apart any second." Maya swallowed hard, forcing herself not to react. "It's my family's car, sir, and I have a valid license," she said evenly, pointing to the document still clutched in his hand. Monroe glanced at the papers briefly before tossing them onto the hood of his cruiser. "Broken taillight," he declared, gesturing vaguely toward the back of her car. "Didn't you notice?" Maya blinked in confusion. Broken taillight. That couldn't be right. Her dad had meticulously checked the car last weekend. Everything was in working order. But arguing wouldn't help, so she simply nodded again. "I'll get it fixed as soon as possible, sir." But Monroe wasn't done. He leaned closer, resting one arm on the edge of her car door. "You kids think you can just hop behind the wheel without knowing the rules, huh?" he said, his tone mocking. "Especially ones like you." "Ones like me?" Maya frowned, unsure what he meant. Was he referring to her age? Her gender? Or was there something else beneath his words? Before she could ask, he continued, his voice growing louder. "I bet you don't even know the first thing about traffic laws. Am I right? Just cruising around hoping nobody notices." Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she refused to let his words rattle her. Instead, she took a deep breath and responded calmly. "Actually, sir, I do know quite a bit about traffic laws. My dad taught me everything he knew, and I've been studying them ever since." Monroe raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Oh yeah? So tell me, genius, what does Section 24-18 of the State Vehicle Code say?" Maya hesitated for only a moment. She recognized the section. It dealt with proper signaling during lane changes. It states that drivers must signal continuously for at least 100 feet before turning or changing lanes unless they're traveling less than 35 miles per hour, in which case the distance decreases to 50 feet, she recited confidently. For a split second, Monroe looked genuinely surprised. Then his smirk returned wider this time. "Well, aren't you full of surprises?" he drawled, though his tone suggested he didn't believe her expertise extended beyond memorized facts. "Guess we'll see how much you really know." As he walked back to his cruiser, leaving Maya sitting alone in her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter wasn't going to end anytime soon. The sinking sensation in her chest told her that Officer Monroe wasn't interested in fairness or justice. He seemed determined to prove some kind of point. Yet despite the tension, Maya reminded herself to stay calm. If there was one thing she'd learned from years of studying law, it was that staying composed under pressure could make all the difference. Little did Maya know, this seemingly routine traffic stop would set off a chain of events that would change both her life and Officer Monroe's forever. For now, though, she sat quietly, waiting to see what would happen next, and preparing herself for whatever challenge lay ahead. While Officer Monroe stood by his cruiser, flipping through Maya's paperwork with disinterest, she sat quietly in her car, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She had done nothing wrong. Her taillights were fine, her license was valid, and she'd been following every rule of the road. Yet here she was, being treated as if she were guilty simply because of who she was. The unfairness of it all burned inside her, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she focused on what she knew best: the law. As she watched him scribble notes on a clipboard, Maya noticed something peculiar. Officer Monroe kept glancing at her car's rear end, squinting as though searching for evidence to justify his claim about the broken taillight. But there was no damage. He couldn't find anything because it wasn't true. Still, he persisted, muttering under his breath about how kids these days didn't take responsibility for their actions. His words dripped with disdain, and Maya felt her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Finally, unable to stay silent any longer, Maya rolled down her window slightly and called out to him. "Sir," she said firmly but respectfully, "I double-checked my lights earlier today and they're working perfectly. If you'd like, I can turn them on now so you can see." Monroe looked up sharply, clearly annoyed that she dared to question him. He strode back to her car, his boots thudding heavily against the asphalt. "Listen, kid," he snapped, leaning close to the window again. "You don't tell me how to do my job. Got it?" Maya nodded quickly, not wanting to escalate things further. "Yes, sir, I just wanted to clarify." "Clarify?" he interrupted, scoffing. "You think I've got time to stand here listening to your excuses? You're lucky I'm not writing you up for more than this." His condescending tone grated on her nerves, but Maya forced herself to remain calm. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her, and she knew exactly how to handle it. With a deep breath, she decided to push back, not aggressively, but intelligently. After all, knowledge was power, and she had plenty of that. "Actually, sir," she interjected smoothly, "according to Section 2422 of the State Vehicle Code, an officer must provide reasonable proof of a violation before issuing a citation. Without evidence of a malfunctioning taillight, I believe this stop may not meet those requirements." For a moment, Monroe froze, his pen hovering midair above the clipboard. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, a smirk spread across his face. "Oh, wow," he said mockingly. "Look at you, quoting laws like some hotshot lawyer. Where'd you learn that, huh? Watching courtroom dramas on TV?" Maya clenched her jaw but kept her voice steady. "No, sir, my father was a civil rights attorney and he taught me a lot about the legal system. Plus, I've been studying law independently for years." Monroe chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, sure. And I suppose you think you're some kind of prodigy now, huh? Go ahead, impress me. What else do you know?" Though his tone was dismissive, Maya sensed an opening. If she could prove her point without losing her composure, maybe, just maybe, she could turn this situation around. So she leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "Well, for starters," she began, her voice clear and confident, "under Article 15 of the state constitution, individuals have the right to challenge unreasonable searches or seizures. Additionally, case law from Rodriguez versus State establishes that prolonged detentions without probable cause violate Fourth Amendment rights." Monroe blinked, taken aback. For a brief second, his smug demeanor faltered, replaced by genuine surprise. But almost immediately, he recovered, his smirk returning. "Big words for a teenager," he muttered, crossing his arms. "But let me guess, you memorized all that off Google, right? Bet you don't even understand half of what you're saying." Maya resisted the urge to roll her eyes. She'd heard this argument before, from teachers, classmates, even strangers, who assumed she couldn't possibly grasp complex concepts because of her age. It was frustrating, yes, but also motivating. She decided to press on, determined to prove him wrong. "Actually, sir," she replied, her tone unwavering, "I competed in a national moot court competition last year. I presented oral arguments based on constitutional law and won first place. Does that sound like someone who doesn't understand the material?" This time Monroe didn't laugh. Instead, he narrowed his eyes, studying her intently. There was something about the way she spoke, calm, measured, and utterly self-assured, that unsettled him. It wasn't arrogance. It was confidence born from preparation and expertise. For the first time since pulling her over, he realized this wasn't just another routine traffic stop. This girl was different. Still, pride wouldn't let him admit it. Instead, he shifted tactics, attempting to regain control of the conversation. "All right, smarty pants," he said gruffly. "Let's say you're telling the truth. What difference does it make? You're still stuck here while I decide what to do with you." Maya tilted her head slightly, her gaze never wavering. "That's true, sir. But if you issue a citation without proper justification, I'll have grounds to contest it in court. And given the precedents we've discussed, I'm fairly certain the outcome would favor me." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Monroe opened his mouth to retort, then closed it again, unsure of how to respond. He hadn't expected this level of resistance or intelligence from a teenager. Most people, in her position, would have crumbled under his intimidation tactics, not Maya. She was holding her own, using logic and facts to counter his assumptions. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of passing cars filled the silence as Monroe wrestled with his next move. Part of him wanted to write the ticket anyway, just to assert his authority. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, was intrigued. Who was this girl, really? And why did she seem so unfazed by his attempts to belittle her? Eventually, Monroe sighed, stepping back from the car. "Fine," he muttered, waving a hand, dismissively. "I'll let you off with a warning this time, but fix that taillight or next time I won't be so lenient." Maya nodded politely, masking her relief. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate it." As Monroe returned to his cruiser and drove away, Maya exhaled deeply, allowing herself a small smile. She had handled the situation as best she could, staying composed and relying on her knowledge to navigate the confrontation. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Not entirely. Something about Officer Monroe's attitude lingered in her mind, gnawing at her sense of justice. Maybe it was the way he dismissed her accomplishments, assuming she couldn't possibly know what she was talking about. Or maybe it was the underlying tone of prejudice that colored every word he spoke. Whatever it was, Maya resolved to take action. Pulling out her phone, she opened the camera app and reviewed the video she'd discreetly recorded during the encounter. Every insult, every sarcastic remark, every baseless accusation, it was all there, preserved for anyone to see. As she uploaded the clip to social media with a caption explaining what had happened, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her. Perhaps this moment could serve a greater purpose. Perhaps it could shine a light on the biases and injustices that too often went unchallenged. And perhaps, just perhaps, it could inspire others to speak up when faced with similar situations. Because if there was one thing Maya had learned from her father, it was that change rarely came from staying silent. The moment Officer Monroe drove away, Maya sat in her car for a few minutes, replaying the encounter in her mind. She felt a mix of emotions, relief that it was over, frustration at how unfairly she'd been treated, and anger at the blatant prejudice she had faced. But beneath all those feelings was something else: determination. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. She glanced down at her phone, where the video of their interaction was saved. It wasn't long before she made a decision. Maya uploaded the clip to social media, adding a caption that explained what had happened during the traffic stop. In clear, concise language, she described how Officer Monroe had mocked her, questioned her intelligence and accused her without evidence, all while dismissing her knowledge of the law. She ended the post with a simple message: knowledge is power, but so is accountability. Let's talk about why this kind of behavior shouldn't be tolerated. Within hours, the video went viral. People from all over the country began sharing it, commenting on Maya's poise and intelligence under pressure. Many praised her for handling the situation so calmly, while others expressed outrage at Officer Monroe's conduct. Words like inspiring, brave, and eye-opening flooded the comments section. Some viewers even shared their own stories of being pulled over under similar circumstances, describing how they too had been subjected to baseless accusations and disrespectful treatment. As the story gained traction, local news outlets picked it up, eager to cover the growing controversy. Reporters reached out to Maya asking for interviews. At first, she hesitated. The attention was overwhelming and she worried about becoming the center of a media storm. But after discussing it with her mom, who reminded her of the importance of using her voice for good, Maya agreed to speak publicly. Her goal wasn't fame or recognition, it was justice. During one televised interview, Maya recounted the details of the traffic stop with remarkable clarity. She spoke not just about what Officer Monroe had said to her, but also about the broader implications of his actions. "It's not just about me," she emphasized, looking directly into the camera. "This happens to people every day, people who may not have the tools or resources to defend themselves. We need to hold law enforcement accountable when they abuse their power, and we need to create systems that protect everyone equally." Her words resonated deeply with audiences, sparking conversations about systemic racism and bias within policing. Social media campaigns began popping up, urging people to demand reforms in their communities. Hashtags like Justice for Maya and Ours Accountability in Action trended nationwide, amplifying calls for change. Meanwhile, backlash against Officer Monroe intensified. Citizens filed formal complaints with the police department, accusing him of misconduct and discriminatory behavior. Calls for his suspension, or even termination, grew louder by the day. Behind the scenes, however, Officer Monroe was grappling with his own emotions. At first, he dismissed the uproar as exaggerated nonsense, convinced that Maya had somehow manipulated the narrative to make him look bad. But as more people came forward with accounts of similar experiences involving him, doubt began creeping in. Late one night, sitting alone in his living room, he replayed the video of their interaction. He watched as Maya calmly cited statutes and challenged his claims, her voice steady despite his attempts to intimidate her. For the first time, he allowed himself to really listen, not just to her words, but to the underlying message they carried. "I underestimated her," Monroe admitted aloud, running a hand through his hair. The realization hit him hard. He had let his biases cloud his judgment, assuming that a young black girl couldn't possibly know more than him about the law. Worse, he had used his position of authority to belittle her, reinforcing stereotypes rather than addressing actual issues. The weight of his mistakes pressed heavily on his chest. The next morning, Monroe arrived at the police station early, bracing himself for the inevitable fallout. Sure enough, Internal Affairs had launched an investigation into his conduct, reviewing past cases and interviewing witnesses. While some of his colleagues defended him, others remained silent, unwilling to condone his behavior. Facing scrutiny from both inside and outside the department, Monroe found himself reflecting on his career and the legacy he wanted to leave behind. One afternoon, as he sat at his desk reviewing reports, he decided to take a step he never thought he'd consider: reaching out to Maya. He knew it wouldn't fix everything, he couldn't undo the harm he'd caused, but maybe, just maybe, it could be a start. Picking up the phone, he dialed the number listed in the report filed by Internal Affairs. "Hello?" Maya's voice answered cautiously after a few rings. "This is Officer Monroe," he said, his tone unusually subdued. I wanted to apologize for everything. What I said to you was wrong, and I'm truly sorry." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Maya finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. "Thank you for apologizing. That takes courage. Monroe nodded, though she couldn't see him. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About my actions, about the way I treat people. I realize now that I've made a lot of mistakes, including with you. Maya listened intently, weighing his words carefully. Part of her wanted to dismiss him outright, to tell him that an apology didn't erase the damage he'd done. But another part of her recognized the sincerity in his voice. Maybe this was an opportunity, a chance to turn a negative experience into something positive. I appreciate your honesty, she said eventually. But words aren't enough. Actions matter more. You're absolutely right, Monroe replied quickly. And I want to do better. If you're willing, I'd like to meet with you, to hear your perspective, to learn from this. Maybe there's a way we can work together to prevent situations like this from happening again. Maya hesitated, considering his offer. On one hand, she wasn't sure she trusted him yet. On the other hand, she believed in the possibility of redemption for individuals and institutions alike. After a moment, she agreed to meet him, setting aside time later that week. When they finally sat down together at a quiet cafe, the atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Maya arrived armed with notes and ideas, ready to advocate for meaningful change. Monroe, for his part, came prepared to listen, not just to respond but to truly understand. As they talked, they discovered common ground, a shared desire to improve community relations and address systemic inequities within law enforcement. By the end of their conversation, they had outlined a plan to collaborate on educational initiatives aimed at reducing implicit bias among officers. They envisioned workshops, training sessions, and open dialogues between police departments and the communities they served. It was a small step, but it was a start, one that held the promise of lasting impact. As Maya left the cafe that day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would undoubtedly be challenges along the way. But if someone like Officer Monroe, a man who had once doubted her, could acknowledge his faults and seek growth, then perhaps real change was possible after all. The days following Maya's meeting with Officer Monroe marked the beginning of a transformation, not just for him, but for their entire community. Word of their collaboration spread quickly, thanks in part to Maya's growing social media presence and the ongoing media coverage surrounding the incident. People were intrigued by the unlikely partnership between a teenage girl who had been mocked for her knowledge and a seasoned police officer who had once dismissed her as insignificant. Skeptics wondered if it was all for show, while optimists hoped it might lead to real change. Officer Monroe took the first step toward rebuilding trust by attending a town hall meeting organized by local activists. He walked into the crowded auditorium feeling uneasy, aware that many attendees viewed him as the embodiment of everything wrong with law enforcement. As he sat on stage alongside Maya and several other panelists, including civil rights advocates and community leaders, he could feel dozens of eyes boring into him, some filled with anger, others with curiosity. When it was his turn to speak, Monroe cleared his throat nervously. I want to start by saying I'm sorry for my actions during the traffic stop with Maya, and for any harm I've caused in the past, he began, his voice steady, despite the weight of the moment. I can't undo what's been done, but I can commit to doing better, to listening, to learning. His words hung in the air, met initially with silence. Then, slowly, a few people began to clap. Encouraged, Monroe continued, sharing his plans to work with Maya on initiatives aimed at addressing systemic bias within policing. He acknowledged the flaws in the system and admitted that he himself had perpetuated them. It wasn't an easy admission, but it was honest, and that resonated with some members of the audience. Maya spoke next, her tone measured yet passionate. This isn't about shaming anyone or pointing fingers, she said, looking out at the crowd. It's about finding solutions, about creating a future where everyone feels safe and respected, no matter who they are or where they come from. She outlined the workshops and training programs they hoped to implement, emphasizing the importance of education and open dialogue. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. While not everyone was ready to forgive or forget, there was a palpable sense of hope. a belief that progress, however slow, was possible. For Officer Monroe, it was a turning point. He realized that earning back trust would take time and effort, but he was willing to put in the work. And for Maya, it reinforced her conviction that even those who seemed like adversaries could become allies when given the chance. Over the next several weeks, Maya and Monroe worked closely together, laying the groundwork for their initiative. They started small, hosting informal discussions with officers from Monroe's department. These sessions were designed to encourage reflection and self-awareness, helping participants recognize unconscious biases they may have harbored. Maya facilitated these conversations, drawing on her experiences and legal expertise to guide the group through difficult topics. At first, many officers were defensive, reluctant to admit fault. But as they listened to Maya's insights and stories shared by community members, their resistance began to soften. One particularly memorable session involved role-playing exercises, where officers stepped into the shoes of individuals being pulled over under questionable circumstances. The exercise forced them to confront the fear and frustration such encounters often evoked. Afterward, one officer approached Maya, visibly shaken. "I never thought about how it feels on the other side," he confessed. "We need to do better." Encouraged by these breakthroughs, Maya and Monroe expanded their efforts, partnering with schools and youth organizations to educate young people about their rights. They hosted mock trials and legal workshops, teaching students how to navigate interactions with law enforcement confidently and respectfully. Maya loved working with kids. She saw herself in them, bright, eager, and full of potential. She reminded them that knowledge was a powerful tool, one that could protect them in moments of vulnerability. As news of their work spread, invitations poured in from neighboring towns and cities. Community groups, police departments, and educational institutions wanted to replicate their model, seeing it as a blueprint for bridging divides between law enforcement and the public. Maya and Monroe traveled frequently, delivering keynote speeches and leading seminars. Their dynamic was unique. Maya brought idealism and vision, while Monroe offered practical experience and insider perspective. Together, they balanced each other, perfectly inspiring audiences with their message of unity and reform. Despite the growing success of their initiative, challenges remained. Not everyone supported their efforts. Some officers resisted change, viewing it as unnecessary or overly critical. Others accused Maya of using her platform to vilify law enforcement, ignoring the fact that she consistently advocated for mutual understanding. Trolls online hurled insults, calling her names and questioning her motives. But Maya refused to let negativity deter her. Instead, she used criticism as fuel, channeling it into motivation to push harder for justice. Meanwhile, Officer Monroe faced pushback from within his own ranks. Colleagues whispered behind his back, accusing him of betraying the Brotherhood. A few even suggested he was trying to polish his image after the viral video embarrassed him. Despite the pressure, Monroe stayed committed to the cause. He knew the road to redemption wouldn't be smooth, but he believed in the value of what they were building. Every time someone thanked him for his honesty or expressed gratitude for the workshops, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Their collaboration also sparked personal growth for both of them. For Maya, working alongside Monroe taught her the importance of patience and empathy. She learned that change rarely happened overnight, and that sometimes people needed time to unlearn deeply ingrained habits. For Monroe, partnering with Maya opened his eyes to perspectives he'd never considered before. He developed a newfound respect for the resilience and strength of marginalized communities, vowing to use his position to amplify their voices rather than silence them. By the end of the year, their initiative had gained national attention. News outlets hailed Maya and Monroe as trailblazers, highlighting their ability to turn conflict into collaboration. Documentaries chronicled their journey, capturing the highs and lows of their efforts. Even policymakers took notice, incorporating elements of their program into broader reform proposals. What had started as a single traffic stop had blossomed into a movement, one that transcended individual grievances and focused on systemic healing. For Maya, the journey was far from over. She still dreamed of becoming a lawyer, using her skills to advocate for those without a voice. But now she understood that meaningful change required more than courtroom victories. It demanded courage, compassion, and a willingness to engage with those who might initially seem like enemies. And for Officer Monroe, the experience redefined his career. He no longer saw himself merely as an enforcer of laws, but as a bridge builder, someone capable of fostering trust and understanding in a fractured world. Together, they proved that even the most unlikely partnerships could yield extraordinary results. All it took was a willingness to listen, learn, and grow, to move beyond prejudice and embrace the possibility of a brighter future. As the months rolled on, Maya and Officer Monroe's partnership blossomed into something neither of them had anticipated, a beacon of hope in a world often divided by mistrust. Their collaboration wasn't just about workshops or training programs anymore. It was becoming a movement that inspired people across the country to rethink the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they served. The unlikely duo continued to push boundaries, tackling tough conversations head-on while challenging deeply ingrained biases. One of their most impactful initiatives was a series of community conversations, informal gatherings held in libraries, churches, and community centers. These events brought together police officers, residents, and local leaders for open discussions about shared concerns and solutions. At first, tensions ran high. Some attendees arrived with preconceived notions, ready to argue rather than listen. But Maya and Monroe worked tirelessly to create a safe space where everyone felt heard. At one such gathering, a middle-aged woman stood up, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've been scared of cops my whole life," she admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "Not because I've done anything wrong, but because of stories I've heard and experienced myself." Her words hung heavy in the room, prompting nods from others who shared similar fears. Officer Monroe leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "I'm sorry you feel that way," he said sincerely. "And I won't pretend to speak for every officer, but I can promise you this. We're here tonight because we want to change that narrative, to build trust, and we need your help to do it," Maya chimed in, her tone gentle yet firm. "Change starts with honesty," she added. "It's okay to acknowledge past mistakes, to admit when things haven't worked. But acknowledgement isn't enough. We have to take action together." The woman wiped her tears and nodded slowly. "All right," she said softly. "I'll give it a chance, for my kids' sake." Moments like these became turning points in their journey. They reminded both Maya and Monroe why they had started this work in the first place, not for recognition or praise, but to mend broken relationships and foster understanding. Each success story fueled their determination to keep going, even when obstacles arose. One of the biggest challenges came when a group of vocal critics attempted to derail their efforts. A handful of officers within Monroe's department accused him of prioritizing public relations over actual policing. "You're softening us up," one colleague sneered during a heated argument in the break room, "making us look weak." Monroe clenched his fists but forced himself to stay calm. "This isn't about weakness," he replied evenly. "It's about strength, the kind that comes from earning respect instead of demanding it. If you're too afraid to face criticism, then maybe you're not cut out for this job." His words silenced the room, leaving his colleagues to grapple with uncomfortable truths. While not everyone agreed with him, some began to see the value in what he and Maya were trying to achieve. Slowly but surely, allies emerged within the department, officers who recognized the importance of reform and joined their cause. Meanwhile, Maya faced her own set of hurdles. Despite her growing influence, she encountered resistance from peers and adults who doubted her ability to effect real change. Some dismissed her as naive, claiming she was too young to understand the complexities of systemic issues. Others accused her of seeking fame, suggesting her motives weren't entirely altruistic. But Maya refused to let negativity define her. Instead, she channeled her energy into proving her critics wrong. She poured countless hours into researching best practices for bias training, consulting experts in psychology and sociology, to ensure their workshops were grounded in science. She also reached out to other young activists, forming alliances with teens and college students passionate about social justice. Together, they launched a nationwide campaign called Youth for Justice, empowering young people to advocate for accountability and equity in their communities. Their efforts paid off in unexpected ways. One day, Maya received an email from a teenager in another state, thanking her for inspiring him to stand up against injustice in his own town. He described how he had used Maya's example to challenge a discriminatory school policy, ultimately succeeding in getting it changed. Reading his message filled Maya with pride, not because she craved validation, but because it showed her that their work was rippling outward, touching lives far beyond their immediate circle. For Officer Monroe, the journey was equally transformative. Working alongside Maya taught him humility and patience, qualities he hadn't always valued in the past. He learned to listen more and interrupt less, to ask questions instead of jumping to conclusions. Most importantly, he discovered the power of vulnerability, the courage it took to admit fault and seek forgiveness. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Their bond deepened as they navigated these challenges together. What had started as an uneasy alliance evolved into a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and admiration. Maya admired Monroe's willingness to confront his flaws while Monroe marveled at Maya's unwavering commitment to justice. They balanced each other perfectly, each bringing unique strengths to the table. By the end of the year, their initiative had expanded exponentially. Cities across the nation adopted their model, implementing similar programs tailored to their specific needs. Law enforcement agencies partnered with schools, nonprofits, and advocacy groups to promote transparency and accountability. Even policymakers took notice, introducing legislation aimed at addressing systemic inequities within policing. Through it all, Maya and Monroe remained steadfast in their mission. They knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but they also knew they weren't alone. Thousands of people, from seasoned activists to everyday citizens, had rallied behind their cause, united by a shared vision of a fairer, more compassionate society. As they prepared for a major conference celebrating their achievements, Maya reflected on how far they'd come. She remembered the fear and frustration she'd felt during that fateful traffic stop, the anger at being underestimated simply because of who she was. But she also remembered the spark of defiance that had driven her to fight back. Not with hostility, but with knowledge and resilience. Officer Monroe, too, found himself reflecting on his journey. He thought about the man he used to be, the one who relied on intimidation and assumptions to maintain control, and compared him to the person he was becoming. It wasn't perfection he sought, but progress. And progress, no matter how incremental, was worth celebrating. When they took the stage at the conference, the audience erupted in applause. Maya smiled brightly, her confidence radiating through the room. "We didn't start this work expecting overnight results," she began, her voice steady and strong. "We started because we believed in the possibility of change, because we knew that even the smallest actions could lead to big impacts." Monroe stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "To anyone out there who thinks it's too late to make a difference, don't give up," he urged. Change begins with a single step. Sometimes it's admitting you were wrong. Other times it's reaching out to someone you once saw as an adversary. Whatever it takes, take that step. Together we can build a future worth fighting for. As the audience rose to their feet, cheering and clapping, Maya and Monroe exchanged a glance. In that moment, they shared an unspoken understanding. Their work was far from finished, but they had laid a foundation upon which others could build. They had proven that redemption and reconciliation were possible, even in the most unlikely circumstances. And as the lights dimmed and the applause faded, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was just the beginning, a stepping stone toward a lifetime dedicated to justice, equality, and healing. The final chapter of Maya and Officer Monroe's journey unfolded on a crisp spring morning, the kind where the air feels alive with possibility. It was graduation day for Maya, and her high school campus buzzed with excitement. Students in caps and gowns milled about, hugging friends and posing for photos, their laughter mingling with the distant hum of parents chatting nearby. For Maya, this moment was more than just a personal milestone. It was a culmination of everything she had fought for over the past year. As valedictorian, Maya had been chosen to deliver the commencement speech. She stood backstage now, adjusting her robe and taking slow, steady breaths to calm her nerves. Her heart raced not from fear, but from anticipation. This wasn't just any audience. It included family members, teachers, classmates, and even some familiar faces from her activism work. Among them sat Officer Monroe, who had taken time off from his duties to attend. He gave her a small nod as their eyes met, silently conveying pride and encouragement. When her name was called, Maya stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. The spotlight warmed her skin as she approached the podium, gripping the edges tightly to steady herself. Looking out at the sea of smiling faces, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the people who had supported her, for the challenges that had shaped her, and for the future that lay ahead. "Good morning," she began, her voice ringing clear through the auditorium. "Today, we celebrate not just our achievements, but the journeys that brought us here. Each of us has faced obstacles, some visible, others hidden, and yet we've persevered. That resilience is what defines us." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "For me, one of those obstacles came last year, during a routine traffic stop. What started as a simple encounter turned into something much bigger, a chance to challenge stereotypes, to speak truth to power, and to remind myself and hopefully others that knowledge is a weapon against injustice." Her gaze swept across the audience, lingering briefly on Officer Monroe. "But this story isn't just about me. It's about partnership. It's about recognizing that real change requires collaboration, even with those who may seem like adversaries at first glance. Together, Officer Monroe and I have worked to bridge divides, to educate and to inspire, and while the road hasn't always been easy, it's taught me that redemption is possible when we choose understanding over judgment." Maya's voice softened as she reflected on the lessons she'd learned. "I've realized that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. It's standing up for what you believe in even when your voice shakes. It's refusing to let prejudice or doubt define your worth. And most importantly, it's remembering that every action, no matter how small, can create ripples of change." The crowd erupted into applause, many wiping away tears as they absorbed her words. Parents beamed with pride, students nodded in agreement, and Officer Monroe sat quietly, his expression thoughtful. He knew better than anyone how far Maya had come, not just as a young woman, but as a leader and advocate. After the ceremony, Maya posed for endless photos with friends and family. When she finally found a quiet moment, she spotted Monroe waiting patiently near the edge of the courtyard. Walking over to him, she smiled warmly. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It means a lot." Monroe returned her smile, though his eyes carried a hint of melancholy. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world," he replied. "You've accomplished so much, Maya. I'm proud of you." They stood there for a moment, reflecting on how far they'd both traveled since that tense traffic stop. Their partnership had transformed not only their lives but countless others. Yet neither of them saw this as the end. It was merely the beginning of new chapters. Over the summer, Maya prepared to leave for college, where she planned to study law and continue her advocacy work. Before departing, she organized a farewell event to thank everyone who had supported her journey. Officers from Monroe's department attended alongside community members, activists, and students. The atmosphere was celebratory, yet bittersweet, filled with heartfelt speeches and shared memories. During the event, Monroe took the microphone, his voice thick with emotion. "When I first met Maya, I underestimated her. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and for that I'll always regret it. But she showed me grace, patience, and wisdom beyond her years. She reminded me that growth starts with humility, and that none of us are too far gone to change." He glanced at Maya, who stood nearby, listening intently. "Because of her, I've become a better officer, a better person. And because of all of you, Our community has grown stronger. Thank you for believing in us even when it wasn't easy." As the evening drew to a close, Maya pulled Monroe aside for one last conversation. "You know," she said, "this isn't goodbye. Our work isn't done. There's still so much to do." Monroe nodded, a spark of determination in his eyes. "I know. And wherever you go, whatever you achieve, remember that you've made a difference, not just here, but everywhere your story reaches." Months later, Maya settled into life at university, balancing rigorous coursework with her growing role as a national advocate for justice reform. Her collaboration with Monroe continued remotely, with the two regularly consulting on new initiatives and sharing updates on their respective projects. Meanwhile, Monroe became a vocal proponent for accountability within law enforcement, mentoring younger officers and championing policies aimed at reducing bias. Their efforts inspired others to follow suit. Across the country, similar partnerships sprang up, uniting law enforcement and communities in the pursuit of fairness and equity. Schools incorporated Maya's story into their curriculums, teaching students about resilience, empathy, and the power of standing up for what's right. Even policymakers referenced their work when drafting legislation designed to strengthen trust between police and the public. Years passed, and Maya graduated at the top of her class from law school. She went on to become a renowned civil rights attorney, taking on landmark cases that challenged systemic inequities. Her courtroom arguments were sharp and compelling, earning her widespread acclaim. Yet she never forgot her roots, or the man who had once doubted her but ultimately helped pave the way for her success. Officer Monroe retired after decades of service, spending his final years mentoring youth and speaking at conferences about the importance of reform. Though his career had been marked by controversy, he left behind a legacy of transformation, one built on second chances and unwavering commitment to doing better. Looking back on their journey, Maya often thought about how a single moment, a traffic stop that could have ended in bitterness, had instead sparked a movement. It was proof that even in the face of prejudice there was room for growth, forgiveness, and unity. And it served as a reminder that true strength lies not in domination, but in the ability to listen, learn, and lead with compassion. In the end, Maya and Officer Monroe's story wasn't just about overcoming adversity. It was about the enduring power of hope. It showed that even the unlikeliest alliances could yield extraordinary results, proving that change was possible when people chose to stand together rather than apart.